Okay, guys, we are back with the Coach Trap podcast. This week, we are very lucky to be joined by an amazing coach, Glenn Birkelev. Before we dive in, I just want to remind you that 90% of coaches quit or fail, and we want to do something about it. So to help yourself to escape the coach trap and to turn your message into a business, click the link below to subscribe and to find out more. But let's dive in. Glenn, I'd love to know a little bit more about you, how you got into this space, and let's have a deep dive into everything that you do.
All right. Thank you very much, Greg. And hi, everyone. So, yeah, my name is Glenn Birkelev. I live in Singapore. I've been an official coach, let's call it that, for a few years now, since 2023. I got into this space simply because I've been in leadership for a couple of decades now. I'm a little bit older than I want to admit, but I've been a leader since I was 24. And I always thought that I was coaching right until I got the opportunity at my current work where I lead over 3,000 people across the globe. I got into an opportunity where they had a leadership development program where I was given an opportunity to have a coach, an actual external coach for 90 days. And I always thought I was coaching my team members. I was helping them. I was giving them guidance. I was telling them what to do. And we called that coaching. And I never really got any official training on what coaching was. It was always like a couple of hours at an offsite and then let's tell you all about coaching and go do. But during that 90-day period where I had unlimited access to an external coach, I was using it for a little bit of self-reflection and soul searching, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And in that process, I found out what coaching is about because I saw it firsthand. And that was my first real opportunity with an external coach. And I was like, this is a very different style of coaching. And I really liked it. And that actually led me to invest in getting a certification in coaching myself. So I took it at Singapore Management University, signed up, went through the whole 72 hours, and through that process also transformed how I've been leading my team going forward and also establishing my coaching business, Glihago, that I'm doing on the side outside of my day job. But it was really that triggered the ultimate or gave me the ultimate push to move me forward because I've been thinking about Glihago for a while, but never really got ahead of it and never really took the leap. And I was like, hey, there are no excuses. It's just just start. And I found it very valuable and very transformative for me. And I wanted to give that back to people who are in my situation or have been in what situation that I've been and help them achieve their goals and aspirations and dreams.
Of that. And I can resonate with that a lot. The whole reason, I've been coached myself twice, and a part of the reason of creating the coach trap was to give back, right? So I
Mm,
relate with that massively. One of our big beliefs is you can't lead others down a path unless you've walked it yourself,
yeah,
and you've done that in abundance, right? Which
yeah.
brings me on to that next point. The first thing that I saw when I come across your LinkedIn profile, and it hit me like a bolt from the blue. I have been where you are, right? So for me and Dan, that's a big thing, isn't it, Dan? Right? Like this is to create resonance. That's the secret key with coaching and marketing, isn't it? Is to create that light bulb moment. So talk me through a little bit more about that and where that idea come from. And then Dan, maybe we can talk a little bit more about why creating resonance like that is such an important
Yeah.
tool in marketing yourself as a coach.
It's a great question. And I'll have to admit that I've changed my LinkedIn profile headline probably 50 times, trying to figure out, and while I changed jobs and trying to change what works. And it was Dan who gave me the inspiration when we were talking before this particular podcast recording. It was like, hey, think about who are you for and what do you do and who do you want to be and narrow down. And I'm talking a lot about the middle management trap and getting into the executive suite. And the reason why I was thinking about I've been where you are was exactly catered to what I've been talking about for a long time, which is people who come to a certain level in their career. And in this setting, it's like in the corporate life, which most people work in, they get to a point where they're leading teams and they're trying to get to that next level, which typically would be a director level or up. How do I get into the executive suite? And they face a wall. And I was thinking that was me a number of years ago because the first couple of steps, I started out my career as a travel consultant, believe it or not, so contact center worker. And then I've worked my way up and did various different things, which people can look at my LinkedIn profile to see. But at a certain level, when I was leading 100 people in Singapore, I faced this wall myself where I couldn't seem to break through and I didn't know how to get across the line on how do I move up from here. And that was where most of the people that I've been coaching after I started Glihago officially was all about that. how do I get promoted? How do I get into that next level? And I realized that I had to go through that myself. So in my current organization, I've been fortunate enough to actually use my own framework, and I've been promoted and changed my scope 6 times now in 5 years. So it's working. I took a very radically different approach, but it's to tell people that, hey, I get you. I understand where you are. I know it's frustrating because they think that doing the work is going to get them to the next level. And one of the things that I tell people is that what got you here ain't gonna get you there. And that's the big difference. It's one of those things that was mind-boggling to me because I thought what got me there is going to continue to get me to the next phase. And that's not it. And that's what I'm trying to tell with the first line in my profile that, hey, I know it. I know how frustrating it can be. And hey, I'm here to help you with any tools, coaching that I can give you so you can get to that next level wherever you want to be.
I love that. I love that. Dan, what's your thoughts on that resonance, coming from a place of experience, using your own story to resonate with others? What's your philosophy and your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, info can only get you so far. Posting stuff that people kind of could just Google or ChatGPT, which people are doing quite a lot now. What really stands out is when you've lived it. So people don't invest in a coach to get more information because there's information everywhere. They invest in it for accountability, and they invest in it to not make the same mistakes that potentially you did when you were coming up and you didn't have the coach. So they want to save time, they want to save energy, and they want to save mistakes. And obviously, if you've been there, you can do that for them. You know exactly what to do. And sharing that is something that most people don't do. They're either too scared to share it, or they haven't really thought about sharing it. So yeah, it's a huge advantage. Huge advantage.
Yeah. No,
I
and
love
it's,
that.
if I can just
Um,
add one more thing, one of the things that I talk to a lot of people about is that I would argue that 90% of people that stop themselves before they've even tried. They talk themselves out of doing things before they've
yeah,
even tried it, out of fear of what might happen. They create monsters in their own mind instead of just, hey, it's easier once you've tried it a couple of times, everything gets easier. It's like roller coasters. The first time you look at it and you haven't been in it, it's scary. But if you've been on the same roller coaster 5 times, it kind of gets boring and you know what to expect and you're no longer afraid. And that's the same approach with doing things. Get yourself out there and just share. You have more in common with other people than you think. And that's what I've realized as well when I started doing my daily postings and talking about things and writing about things. But that was also to get myself better. When I read and write and talk about things, you automatically get better at things. And that was in this specific relation to leadership and coaching.
yeah, that's amazing. Doing something which scares you more is such a great philosophy, and something that I remember as a young guy when I was a school teacher many, many moons ago. Teaching in a classroom is very different to taking a whole school assembly, right? So teaching a classroom, small spaces, I loved
Yeah.
that. Like one-to-one coaching, I loved it. But going to do a large classroom and people terrified me, and I had to do it to pass the
Yeah.
course. To become a teacher. And one of the things was said, what scares you, do it more, you'll become better, right? So actually, it's funny, you do it once or twice, then the fear factor's gone.
Yeah.
I've still not quite brought myself to the point of applying to do a TEDx or any
Yeah.
public speaking or anything like that. It still absolutely terrifies me. But it's a great philosophy to have, actually, is what scares you,
Yeah.
do it more. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Which brings me on to a next fact, right? So coming into that, from that standpoint of talking from experience, you can't lead others down the path unless you walked it yourself. That the power of storytelling, right? So stories are 22% more memorable than facts, right? So that's why stories are so important in marketing yourself as a coach on LinkedIn, social media space, and also, to resonate with clients, right? Storytelling. Saw a great one on your post this week on your LinkedIn that you
Yeah.
post um, about living in Singapore, and being married to, an Asian. I love that, the personal side of it. Where did the inspiration come, and did you feel, are you going to be more inspired to write stuff more like that? Tell us a bit more about that story, and then
Yeah.
where it come from, and then Dan, you can break that down if you like.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So my wife's Indonesian, Asian. So I met her in Denmark. We worked for the same company, but have lived in Singapore now for over 15 years. And one of the things that I realized was that as a Dane, we use irony and sarcasm a lot. So whenever we communicate with each other, it's irony and sarcasm. And when I moved to Singapore, actually, I found out very early on that this doesn't work, and including with my wife, because let's call it the Asian ear and the Danish ear, because we grew up with this irony and sarcasm where you have to kind of understand what it is so you know what people mean. But because it's not that prevalent in Asia, people took what I said literal. And that was it's a massive issue, both at home and at work. And because I think Brits as well also use sarcasm a lot. I have a couple of British colleagues. So it's very common. We get along quite well and we can do it there. But I got into a little bit of trouble when I actually used it because my wife didn't understand it and my team didn't understand it either. And I had shared a story the other day around frog porridge, which is a big thing in Singapore as well, where I used to say, "Oh yeah, I just love frog porridge," and then it kind of got to the point where you end up getting served frog porridge in every event, and I had to explain to them that I really don't like it. It's not a great thing for me. I'm sorry, and that's where you get into that issue. And I thought about it as a story because I've noticed my LinkedIn post whenever I talk about something personal or post a picture of my reflection walks on the weekends, it gets way more traction than when I'm actually teaching people something that I find valuable. So a picture of me taking a walk in Singapore is like 4, 5, 6x the reach and more comments. So I was like, I got to get more personal. And it was also, again, Dan had a couple of comments where he loved the fact that you went in and you just grilled me when you looked at my LinkedIn profile. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I get more personal? But it's also because I'm a little bit reserved. There are certain things that I don't necessarily want to share my entire personal life with the world, and also out of respect for my wife, I'm trying to keep her as much out of it as possible. But I was like, hey, I can use these stories because it's actually a big thing with both Scandinavians and Europeans coming to Asia. And I thought of it because I'm very passionate about communication and teaching people the power of communicating right. And storytelling is a part of that. And then I was like, hey, I have to do this myself. And that's where it comes in because the high context communication style of Asia versus Denmark is so different that in order for you to succeed, you have to adapt your communication style. You have to leave the irony and sarcasm at home. It's not going to cut it, and it will not enable you to get where you want to be. For instance, the middle management trap or moving into the executive suite, it doesn't work. You might get lucky to work in an international organization where it's less of an issue, but you have to realize if you work in Asia, there's a lot of colleagues who don't necessarily understand what you mean when you say things. So that was what inspired me, and I have a number of posts lined up around this communication and the third space where you're in a marriage where I come from one culture, my wife is from another, and we live in a country that's neither of our own. And those things I think are important to talk to people about because I've struggled with it, and I'm fairly certain that others are as well.
Dan, when I would hear a story like that, right, when I would hear something like that, for me, is 22 times more memorable than facts, right? So if you say the lesson, right, it almost repels, bounces off. But using the story as a vehicle to get the lesson across, right? Is that how you would see it? How would you see that from like a copywriting sort of point of view as like transfer, if you like,
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think obviously telling stories just for the sake of it, there's not really any point. There's got to be an intention behind it. I actually posted on LinkedIn about that this morning. There's got to be intention. There's got to be a purpose to every single post. Otherwise, you're kind of just sharing stuff and people don't even know who you are, what you do, how you can help them. So it's pointless. So it all needs to come back to your offer. I think a lot of coaches get kind of bogged down in, I have to be a life coach or I have to be a leadership coach. But that's so broad. Who are you helping? Why are you better than all the other life and leadership coaches? And that comes down to your story. So who do you help? Usually it's yourself a few years ago. Because obviously if you have a problem, probably thousands, millions of others also have the same problem. And if you've solved it, you can solve it quicker for them. So that's how your offer should be built. And then stories come as an extension of that. So how do you overcome XYZ problem? Some specific thing that's not just a story of what you had for dinner last night, a story of how you actually overcame a problem that your ideal client or your past self would have been like, oh yeah, that's so useful. I could use that right now. So yeah, stories, such a huge advantage and something that very few people are using well.
Yeah. I agree. It's a great way to say it, Dan. So for me, using story is the way to transfer information, if you like, right? So beyond every post, right, everything that I do, I try to think about that SLAY method, right? Story, lesson, analysis, you. So the lesson would be what would I learn from the story? The analysis is why that worked or didn't work, and have you had something similar, right? To try and create what me and Dan calls the holiday test, right? Where you have that moment of resonance with someone, right? So the way I would describe that and why stories are great in that transfer in the holiday test is when you're away in a foreign land, right? Let's say you're in, Spain or wherever it might be, and you recognize someone who has the same accent as you want to know more about them. You want to know why they're here. You want to know their story. You want to know, you want to get to know them. That is the key behind the storytelling in the posting, isn't it, Dan? So if you try to appeal to everyone, you talk to no one. If you try to niche down and talk about, like that great story that you had about, your wife, right? And the differentials of that sort of stuff in work, right? It won't appeal to everyone. It's not a glamorous, even though it's not major glamorous, but what it is it strikes a chord, doesn't it, Dan? It strikes a chord, and that's what's key here. And I think that's what every guru will preach against. They want vanity metrics, whereas we want it to pass the holiday test, right? So, which leads me on to the next bit. Something that me and Dan might not know that well, right? And this is your area, the middle management trap. Another thing I picked up off your LinkedIn and what you're talking about. And obviously, this is, it's about resonating with the few, not with everyone. Me and Dan won't know what that means. We're not in that space. But obviously, the people that you work with and the people in your business will know that well. So that works in terms of the coach trap holiday test, doesn't it, Dan, right? Because it's an interesting aspect, right? So tell us a little bit more about that. And Dan, I know you'll be there with your copyright in mind, interesting to break it down.
Yeah, and no, it's a great one. I think it's so generic, and this is where the issue or maybe the challenge is that this topic is so broad that we're essentially talking about how do I get promoted into a more strategic position. That can be super broad. So how do we narrow it down? But the middle management trap, just to give the high level of what it is, it's exactly the point where you're squeezed in between the strategic leadership that is doing all the strategy, the architecture, orchestration of the entire organization, and you are leading the people who are doing the work. So you're caught in the middle where you have to be both close enough to the operations, let's call it that, and the strategic part of it. The upper management or the leaders above you, the C-suite and executive leaders, they want you to be strategic. And the reality is your team wants you to be operational. So you get this pull from both sides where it's really troubling to get out of, because most of the middle managers that I see, they tend to focus on what they know. So they stick with the operational one, and they don't necessarily know how to link their story of what they're doing to why it's important for the organization. And that's the biggest challenge that I see they have. They can't communicate what they're doing and to why it matters for the organization, because that to me is what strategy is. It's just explain very simply what you do and why it matters to the organization. But most of the operational or middle managers, they tell why things are important to them or their team. And that's not what someone who leads an entire organization want to hear. They're like, hey, great work with this one, but why does it matter? Tell me why I should care. And this is coming back to the storytelling piece. And this is why middle managers get squeezed, because they get pulled from both sides, but they don't know how to actually cater to their own aspirations and promotion path by being more strategic. And what I'm seeing is that they actually have to move from a probably 80-20, so 80% operational to 20% strategic. They have to set up their environment and their team so they can actually be 20% operational and 80% more strategic. And that shift is a mindset shift that no one has taught them before, because typically you get the first couple of promotions in an organization by doing your job well. The first time you become a team leader or something like that is because you knew how to do the job, so you can lead the people who do the job. But the next level around being a manager of manager is all of a sudden you're not doing the work. You're leading people who lead the people who do the work. And now you're getting stuck because your identity is getting a little bit lost. It feels like you're not doing anything because you're not doing the work, and you still haven't taught or learned how to actually communicate or orchestrate. And that's, for me, is the middle management trap. And that's where they get stuck, because senior leaders want them to talk about why things matter, but they are more comfortable talking about what they know. And that's why they don't move up. They get stuck where they are, and that's the middle management trap. Hopefully I explained that well enough. But yeah, that's what I like to talk about, because I was stuck in that space for years as well, and I didn't know what to do.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's perfect. Dan, where would your mind go with that in the world of social media and presenting it?
Question. I think it's very similar to content, actually. It sounds like it's just calling out what you do and why it matters, which most people aren't doing. And then obviously what to do after they've read the content. How would I position it? Well, I think that the first thing to think about is obviously the hooks. because stories are good, they're going to resonate. But if people don't recognize themselves in like the first line of the post, they're not going to keep reading the story. They're not going to give a stranger the chance to take 5 minutes of their time. It's quite valuable if a stranger takes that. If they read every single post, they wouldn't really have time to do anything else. Calling that out in the first line, exactly who you help, why you help them, is really important as well. Because people need to read. You don't want people to have to read the story to know that it's them.
Yeah.
You want to call that out instantly. So
So
it's just a case of that.
yeah, that's a good point. So I've got one more question for maybe both of you, and then Glenn, we can come to that question at the end where you ask us. So the idea of using stories to resonate, right? And content only ever shines the light on the door. You need to create the stepping stones to walk them through the door, right? Glenn's created a book, right? What an amazing thing. And actually, like, if you look at it from the outside of me looking at it with what I know about this space, right? Audio, visual, kinesthetic, the fact that most, coming from like a male perspective, lots of men don't even want to admit to being coached, right? It's quite hard to get reviews and things out of guys. I think that's a great way to get a philosophy and like a transfer of information. Not everyone has to buy into one-to-one coaching. There's 7 different income streams for a coach. I think a book's great. So Glenn, in a minute, I'd love to know a little bit more about the book. But Dan, in terms of if you were gonna, if you speak to another coach, would that need a really well orchestrated DM strategy or like a super hyper specific newsletter? What would you do with that sort of message?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many angles you could go with it. Obviously, with the book as a coach, you're not trying to become an author. You're trying to help people so that they think, okay, he knows what he knows what he's talking about. I want to become a client. Easiest way to promote a book is literally just to add a CTA at the end of every post, every other post, and say, if you like this, you're going to like my book. It's going to solve more problems. And that's a really easy way to get people in the door to kind of becoming a fan almost, so that they're not just looking at content like everyone else is. They're actually kind of in there and learning. So it's not obviously about the book sales, it's about getting the client. Another way you could do it, emails. Emails are a great way because obviously you're going to be reading for longer on an email, and it feels a little bit less salesy to say at the end of an email, by the way, you'd like this book, if that makes sense. So you could even like cut chapters of the book into emails and use it as a lead magnet. That's something we're thinking of doing in the future as the coach
Yeah.
trap,
Yeah.
because it's
A
going to
little
show
plug there, Dan.
obviously. Yeah, a little plug, of course. I had to do it. And that's obviously something that's going to be useful as well to people, even if they don't buy the book. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
Yeah. I think the book's great. What it is, it fills the 6 to 7 clicks, 7 hours that somebody needs to make before they buy. And it's from a coaching point of view. I think it's such a great thing to give. Not all about money and sales but actually like trying to encourage a transfer of your philosophy and your message. I love that. I think the book's a great idea. So Glenn, before your question for Dan, right, in the coach track, tell us a little bit more about, the inspiration for the book, and do you find it's a good sort of like soft invitation into your sort of coaching?
Yeah, so I actually wrote multiple ebooks, and I wanted to use it as a lead magnet kind of thing, like give something away, like help people, because one of my core values is to help others. And I was like, hey, how do I get this out there? I'll ask one of the questions in a while, but one of the things that has surprised me the most is that even if things are free, people don't take it. It's a funny thing, but yeah, what inspired me was really around communication, and it's again in this middle management trap. It's not so much what you do; it's how you communicate about what you do. So communication is so important and underpins everything that we do, including in coaching, because communication is about how do you ask the right questions so that people can find their own answers instead of telling people what to do. And that's also communication. So it made me write things down that I've learned over a long period of time when I've been a leader. So it's about leadership communication. It's about how do you tell your stories right? How do you make sure that your team actually wants to listen and follow what is being said and be inspired by you as a leader? So it was about leveling up as a leader. I haven't yet written a book about coaching, but it's something that I'm playing around with, toying around with when I have a bit more time, and that's one of the excuses I know. We can always find more time. But no, I wrote that, and I'm sharing the first chapter, technically the foreword and the first chapter I'm sharing in this book, and then just inspiring people. Hey, if this is something you would like, go get it. It's not something I'm pushing too hard, but yeah, it's on my website. But it was really around, I see so many people struggling with communication. Again, especially because I'm working in Asia, I think it's also the power balance between leaders and their employees is much more distinctive. In Denmark, it's like even when I was a travel agent, I would go into the CEO's office and say, "Hi Jens, how are you doing?" No one does that in Asia. So it's about narrowing the gap on that communication barrier that there is. That was really what inspired me because I see it every day. I see people stumble in presentations. I see their stories not being coherent or that it doesn't click. No one understands why they should care. And I wanted to help my team. And then I thought, hey, if I'm helping my team and writing this down, I could help others as well who will very likely again be in the same situation and then use it as a giveaway to get people into a funnel. Because then what you mentioned around getting emails or sending out via emails, that was actually one of the things that I'm struggling with, like, because you have to get an email first before you can send something to a person. So how do you get them in the door first? And that was the original intention with, hey, I can write a book and I can give it away. Right now it's the first chapter, but recently I've been thinking about, let me just give it away. Because if it does good, it's better than just giving a first chapter away. That was my philosophy around it.
Just before I pass you to Dan, we found out a good stepping stone between, wanting to collect someone's email, was WhatsApp, believe it or not. So one of the biggest changes we made to our landing page was integrating a WhatsApp button into it. You'll be so surprised how people they are not so keen to give away their email, but very comfortable to give away their phone number. It's really interesting. That is just a real quick hack, which might be able to fill that gap between, their and email. But you must have a dying question for Dan, right? And this is a part where we try to motivate other coaches. Maybe that they're thinking about quitting, or they've been burnt by guru, whatever it is, right? We want to give back. We want to help others. So let's try to inspire someone who's going to listen and watch. Let's crack on with a story for Dan.
No, I think there's a couple of things that I was thinking about. Let me start with the first one, because Greg, you mentioned it earlier around when you go through a coaching program, no one teaches you how to find clients. And even in the coaching course itself, 72 hours of asking the right questions, active listening, and making you a great coach. And then they teach you how to register your coaching hours so you can potentially seek out an ICF certification. I give you all the links and documents for that, but no one tells you how to actually find a client. And one of the things that frustrated me a bit was they tell you, oh, you can do reciprocal coaching with other coaches who are trying to get certification. But that doesn't really help anything once you are trying to seek out clients that will pay for your services. So that was the first thing that actually came to mind. Like, how do we get clients and what's some of the best ways? I know we talked about funnels and getting emails and creating that. But what would be the best ways for someone who's starting out or wants to make coaching or leadership development their living? Where should they start and why?
That's a big question. I mean, there's infinite ways to get clients. The easiest way, or the most common way, would be to post content. So the content is obviously to build trust with the client and to attract them in the first place, because sometimes you don't even know where they are. So you've kind of got to become a magnet and they come to you almost on the platform. So how do you get a client? Content, build trust. With trust, you can do stuff like collect emails, sell books, etc. That builds the extra layer that people want to see you, 6 to 8 hours of your content before they kind of trust you enough to buy. In the emails, CTAs, to booking a call. That is how I would go with it. And then obviously on the call, it doesn't have to be a sales call instantly. It has to be qualifying. So would they benefit from your coaching? Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe that might be a case of your content not being specific enough, but it's one of those things. I mean, you could get clients from ads. Obviously, that costs money. You could get clients from friends, but you might not have friends who are your ideal client. So content is the easy option or the clear option for it, which is why we teach it.
And when it leads me to my follow-up question. Then when you're saying about creating content, so I know I went through this myself, like how much content and how do I find time to create content? Because it is time consuming to write newsletters, write articles, and figure out something to write about. And one thing that I've been struggling with is, and I don't know if this is an issue, and that's where you might be able to help me, is am I being repetitive? And in some of the content, I sometimes feel is I'm telling the same stories over and over again. And is that going to be an issue for the audience, or is that actually more helpful? But how do you find time to create? If you want to post daily, it's time consuming. And that's something I've realized. So what's your
It
advice
can be.
to, well, myself, but also the people who are listening here on where do you even start on
Yeah.
content?
So, I mean, the way I would do it, the system that we often teach to a lot of the coaches is start on Twitter. So that every problem that you can think of, maybe you already have a couple of clients, every problem that they ask, write it down. Every problem that you think maybe your past self would have had, write it down. And then literally just solve it on Twitter. No need for any like optimization, writing, anything like that. Literally just post it. And then you will find that many of the tweets don't do well and they're kind of not wasted, but flopped. And some of the tweets will do really well. And you'll realize that, okay, people are really thinking about this problem, which is where you go onto LinkedIn, or where I go onto LinkedIn, copy the topic of the tweet that did well, because obviously people are resonating with it. Your ideal client is resonating with it. And then going a little bit deeper. And then telling the stories. So how did you overcome that problem yourself? In a little bit more detail. It can be time consuming. It shouldn't really take more than probably an hour a day to do all of this. It takes us an hour a day to do, 5 platforms, DMs and comments, all in an hour. I mean, Greg is much more efficient than me, I would say. I spend a little bit more time obsessing over details. But yeah, 20 minutes comments, 20 minutes DMs, 20 minutes content. So I don't know if Greg, you want to talk more about that
No, it's such a
because you're
great
better than
question.
me,
And
to be honest.
no, no, it's such a great question. We called it the coach trap for many reasons. So, talking about coming out of getting a certificate and how you actually get clients right, the coach trap fits many great aspects of why it's a trap. In finding your own clients is one, right? Obviously, your first call is to go for maybe for an agency. If you go to an agency, you pay them fees, and you've got to stick to their rules. You can't allow it yourself, right? So
Mm.
that's not. It's a good starting point, but it's not the best. The second one is obviously referrals, right? You're talking about, friends or coaching. Nothing beats word of mouth, right? But word of mouth can also come through content. That can also come from communities. That can come from LinkedIn. That can come from being friends, right? So nothing beats. That's why me and Dan have been very careful with the coach tribe and trying to build it into a cult-like tribe, right? So people talk, right? And that's word of mouth referrals, but doing it through content. So that helps. Now, in terms of the actual content itself, one of the big changes that Dan made when he helped me as a life coach, right, was to stop me preaching about my job or whatever I did in the past and to get me to become a problem solver. So instead of people reaching out for Greg, the life coach, it was Greg who's had this aspect of his life. He's solved it and helped others. He can help me. So just a change there, Dan, isn't it, in terms of like the storytelling perspective that we talked about. So many coaches I see on LinkedIn go in, they set their profile and they have XYZ, NBB, MSc, whatever all these names after. I'm thinking, all you're doing is inflating your ego, not solving problems for other people. That's the coach trap. To put a broad thing on it is to take yourself out of the equation. With everyone that we work about, actually, when coaches start, they make themselves the hero. How good I am, how flash I am, the OnlyFans paradox, Dan, isn't it, right? And actually need to take yourself out of it, not make yourself the hero, make the client the hero, and make yourself the guide. And to do that, you need an enemy. So that would be your enemy is the middle management trap, right? And that it resonates to other people who are also seeing it as the enemy. That is part of the thing with the content, isn't it? Is not to say how glossy life is, how perfect life is, how chiseled my six pack is, or how great my purple Lamborghini is in Dubai. That doesn't resonate, Dan, does it? It repels. So that's why we called it the coach trap. But that's what I like about a book. It's a soft entry. It's a nice way to get to know you, right? Like what we do with the podcast and the newsletter and the community is creating that stepping stone. So yeah, really, really good question. Glenn, just before we finish, where's the best place for people that are listening to this to find you?
So one is my LinkedIn profile. I post there daily, so that's an easy way to, and if you want to connect with me, please feel free to connect with me. Just write what would be the way that I can support you and help you. It's always a good way in. The other thing is my website. So it's glihago.com, fairly straightforward. There's a ton of free information in there as well. I have a communication course and book and all sorts of things you can download for free. So those are what I say would be the primary sources. I do also create video content from a leadership development standpoint. It's something I do on YouTube. So you can also just search Glihago on YouTube and you'll find me there. And that's where I create most of my video content. Still need a bit more time. I do have a day job, so I am, let's call myself a weekend coach at the moment. I have a full-time job professionally on the side as well. So I do create content there as well. So YouTube, LinkedIn, and glihargo.com. That's where you can find me.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And guys, for everyone who's listening, remember, whatever you do, don't fall into the coach trap.